Welcome. Mosaic of modern humans built by group Q, Queen, Amerindian haplogroup, and A, Alpha, African haplogroup as suggested ancestrals. Presented as examples of groups are the frequency maps of the Y-DNA groups Q, Queen, purple on the left, and A, Alpha, red on the right. In other videos, I report fundamental evidence that proves that Amerindian Q, purple, is the ancestor of all modern humans. Historically, consensus presents African A, Alpha, red, as ancestor, but until today, consensus could not report similar fundamental evidence for the African A, Alpha, as that it could report, had or should have had reported, for the Amerindian Q, Queen. When consensus first presented A, Alpha, as the ancestor of all humans, some or all of the necessary fundamental evidence and markers did not yet exist, or the results were not yet sufficiently available or verified, and the latter is still the case. Amerind haplogroup Q, Queen. Q, Queen, covers over 80% of the area of North and South America with a very high frequency of over 60%, and covers as well an exceptionally large part of the world with a lower frequency. When the Q, Queen coverage is expressed in inhabitants, I estimate this coverage to be much more than 80% in the case of the Americas, because the area where the Q, Queen frequency decreases is classified as Arctic, subarctic, or very cold, and its vegetation is classified as coniferous forest, and this suggests low population densities. No other group comes close to achieving such extensive coverage and such a high frequency throughout the world as the Q group does. This is certainly a differential that the ancestor of all humans should present, and the Q, Queen, is the only one that presents it. Zoom in on Europe. Featured the leftover of Q, Queen, with red to pink color, at low frequencies in Europe. I explicitly say the remainder of Q, Queen, because the origin Q, Queen is a very old group that went through several elimination and replacements or exchange events, turnover events, where they were eliminated or replaced by hybrids more organized or more war-orientated than Q, Queen itself. This replacement or exchange happening after Q, Queen had populated most of the world, if not the whole world. Since the Q, Queen in Europe refers to lower frequencies that today also do not cover very large continuous areas, the Q, Queen in Europe appears only limited in the world map, that, differently from the Western Eurasia map, presents frequencies only from 2% of frequency. It makes Q, Queen, seem absent in Europe when it isn't. 4 groups, DNA research by David Reich, are presented with the colors green, red, blue, and brown, of which at least 2 are boomers, the explosives or groups of Y-DNA R1, Romeo 1, which appeared approximately 8,000 years ago in Western Eurasia. Since the boomers, the explosives R1, Romeo 1, are hybrid groups, and since hybrid groups can differ a lot from each other, this because they can be of different makings or differently hybridized, these 4 groups are very different in an unexpected way and in a way atypical for biology. There are indications that the 4 groups are hybrids coming from the Americas by or through different routes. There are indications that at least 2 of these 4 groups are R1 hybrids or boomers, the explosives, that come from the R1 root and cradle in North America, in English root and cradle. Haplogroup R1A Y-DNA Upedia. Citation of the publication mentioned in the title above. Amerindian R1, red, populations spread genes for light skin, white peoples, blonde hair, and red hair. When a group, such as R1, has an emphasis on Iceland and the western and northern parts of Great Britain, that is already an indication that it is an Amerindian, and that it came along or through the North Atlantic route, this by an ocean current. There is now strong evidence that tribes, haplogroups, R1A and R1B, during the Bronze Age contributed to the spread of the A111T mutation of the SLC24A5 gene, which explains approximately 35% of the difference in skin tone between Europeans with light skin and Africans with black skin, and which also explains most of the variations in skin tone in Southeast Asia. End of the quote. Since these 4 groups were mixed before 4,000 years ago, and since this mixing most likely happened during the West Eurasian population turnover by the hybridized Amerindians, horsemen or Yamnaya, this West Eurasia population turnover is led and dominated by R1, and all this is yet another indication that Africans were not involved in the population of Europe and Western Eurasia with modern humans, something that happened recently, only about 4,000 years ago. There is a lot of evidence that the actual morphologies of people of the Botai, Sintashta, Yamnaya, and all other Western Bronze Age European to West Eurasian cultures were in Europe and Western Eurasia immediately after the appearance in mass of these new groups that appeared out of nowhere and in a very advanced way. Featured on your screen are images of one of the many metallurgical furnaces or ovens supposedly installed inside of every house in the Sintashta communities. I see their centers more as military enhanced or industrial complex types than I see them as normal communities with focus on housing. The Botai communities also have an organization similar to that of the Sintashta, with metallurgical ovens or furnaces, but the community is less fortified and more oriented to herds. In these newly arrived cultures, there are many unprecedented indications of advancement and organization that cannot come out of nowhere, as the relative silence of consensus could suggest. The cultures of these newcomers were fully animal and herd oriented, and also warfare, and campaign oriented, and these cultures were dependent on these animals and herds, including for milk and dairy products. Further, these cultures were there immediately too. In other words, these cultures also seemed to come out of nothing, while in reality they arrived over the ice and through ocean currents in mass, bringing their cultures and all what is needed along. Morphology, light skin, animals, location in sequence, starting from the Yenisei entrance towards the Altai Mountains in the south and the Ural Mountains more to the west, both these mountainous regions featuring huge reserves of metals and other resources. This, till today, all points to a non-African origin and to the arrival and entry via the Arctic Yenisei River, Route 1, which is the preferred entry to Eurasia, etc., of the Amerinds and the hybrid Amerinds, who have practiced the same customs since long time in their lands of origin in the Americas. The Arctic Yenisei River entry, Route 1, especially is the preferred entry to Eurasia, etc., when they bring along with them their larger animals, even in herds, which they heavily depend on. The communities, in my view, are similar and even better organized, diversified, and decentralized, and with the strategically chosen locations that certain outposts of the Romans in the territories for them very distant that they were going to conquer and annex. Route 1 and Entry 1. Route 1 seems far away, but that's because the map formats, deforms, and stretches horizontally closer to the North Pole. The real distance of Route 1 is approximately 4,000 kilometers. This distance is approximately 1, the distance from northern Finland to Gibraltar, or 2, approximately distance from Arctic Yenisei River entrance, Route 1, to Beringia. Time is very short for any evolution from dark skin, black skin, to light skin, and the development of the mutations mentioned above, which are brought from the root and cradle from North America. Combinations that compose a complex of paradigms for consensus, like mtDNA-L from mitochondrial Eve, the arrival of Africans, and the acquisition of Neanderthal DNA. It is obvious that the hypothesis, the L mtDNA of mitochondrial Eve, the arrival of Africans, the acquisition of Neanderthal DNA, are all dependent on each other to sustain consensus. Amongst others, that's why I speak of combinations. Neanderthal DNA through crossing or hybridization markers. Simplified introduction. Unproven hypothesis. Consensus assumes that Europeans and Western Eurasians all came from Africa as Africans 50,000 to 80,000 or even more years ago. This without the Neanderthal fraction, because consensus is aware that sub-Saharan Africa still lacks this Neanderthal fraction. That after leaving Africa, they did interbreed and had offspring with Neanderthals and Denisovans. These Africans evolved into Western European and Eurasian types with fair skin and more extreme lactose tolerance. That around the year 1500, Europeans and Western Eurasians organized expeditions to the world, including to the Americas, and eliminated and replaced, among many others, the Amazon Amerind man from Colombia. These are still hypotheses that have not yet been proven. This turnover, elimination and replacement is proven through ancient DNA in the skeletons, aDNA or ancient DNA, research by David Reich. When the newcomers arrived, they already arrived with light skin, with techniques and habits and with their horses, etc. All this coming from the plains of America or even earlier cradles like the Amazon forest. Herds. I start with the herds and not the routes or the boats because possibly the herds arriving in Eurasia, etc. was essential for the change in choice of routes and from then on mass use of boats, and all this changed and happened only after the indispensable animals were already present or in place in sufficient numbers in the destinations for transport, war, campaigns, as well as the turnovers, as well as in agriculture, to among others cut or plough the land. More details about routes and boats are presented in other videos. Certain herds of animals, including dogs and more other dominantly larger animals, passed through the Arctic ice routes by using sleds or trains or caravans of sleds, possibly pulled by dogs, by reindeer, or partially by sails and or kites. Initially, possibly following migration routes of wild animals such as the also commercially important mammoths, amongst others. Important animals could have been transported possibly while young, in small numbers, in boats, provided with sufficient of their food that navigated the currents and winds. Potential of the currents. Navigating the currents and winds is something even juvenile fish of only a few centimeters length can accomplish in mass. Eels leave European rivers to migrate passively by currents and winds to the Sargasso Sea, this through the North Atlantic current to breed for the first time in the Sargasso Sea, which is home to the Bermuda Islands. At the end of the cycle, some up to 1.5 meters eels arrive in Europe, North America, including parts of the Caribbean, and North Africa, including the Mediterranean Sea. Thanks for watching. Bye.